All right. So, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Jared Bonaquisti, and with me is Dr. Mike Fernandez. We are with Kinetic Physical Therapy, and we're going to be talking tonight with Theresa Giunta, who is a mental performance coach, or specializing in kind of your sports realm there, right? And she is from Summit Performance Consultants, a nice company that's fairly new out of Philadelphia, right? Who has a lot of teams in the area. And tonight, what we're going to be talking about is returning to sports and, mastering your mindset during COVID so that you can be not stress-free, right? Not that case, but, feeling more comfortable on the field so you can prevent injury and perform at your best. So we're going to turn it over to Theresa here to kind of start us off.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Jared. So hi, everybody. Welcome. So like Jared said, we're really going to be diving into the emotions, feelings, thoughts, everything that athletes might be going through as they start to transition back into sport and limitations and restrictions start to lift. So I'm really going to be diving into what you as parents and coaches can do to help facilitate an effective transition, and then kind of help your athletes develop a toolkit to help them, make sure that they can and will perform at their best and to the best of their ability. So let's get into it here. So like Jared said, I co-own a sports psychology consulting business called Summit Performance Consulting. My business partner, Emily Galvin, is there on the left in the blue. So we run this together, and our ultimate goal is to help athletes master their mindsets. And we do that by enhancing mental toughness. So we work with athletes, coaches, and teams from the youth to the high school, all the way up to the collegiate level. So whoever's watching, if you're part of that, I hope I can speak to any type of competitive environment that your athletes will be transitioning back into. Here is a little roadmap of what we're going to be getting into. All right. So the first concept really is just this awareness piece, right? Having athletes become aware and teaching athletes to become aware of what they're experiencing. A lot of times athletes know what they're feeling and what they're experiencing and maybe why, but not necessarily know how to manage it. Right, so that's where mental skills training comes into play. Effective coping strategies come into play, which we'll get into some tangible skills that you can utilize both in the home and as athletes transition from home to the field. And we're going to get into the difference between activation and anxiety, and really how all of these concepts lead to developing a resilient mindset. Okay, so this first piece is huge. So whenever I work in any type of mental skill development or performance enhancement, we talk about awareness. And awareness is the knowledge or perception of a situation or a fact. Okay, so if we take this situation right now, transitioning back into sport, restrictions being lifted, athletes might be experiencing in very different ways. Okay, so it's the same situation, but you could have one athlete who could care less about social distancing and COVID and is so excited to get back and be in competition with their teammates and be engaged with their teammates, right? Versus you could have another athlete who's really anxious and nervous about it. And that could be due to being around more people and still having to social distance, or that could relate to the fear of not being at the same level that they were pre-shutdown, having maybe a little bit lack of confidence. Or you could have the athlete that is experiencing all of those emotions, right? So first we want to become aware of what our athletes are experiencing, feeling, and thinking, because then we can help them effectively cope with that. We have to know the what and the why before we get into the how. It's a very simple way to do that. Challenge asking two simple questions. Is that thought true? And is it helpful? Okay. So if you take the thought, let's take that really anxious athlete or nervous athlete, what if I don't perform as well as I can? What if I mess up? What if I'm around too many people, right? Okay. Challenge your athlete. Is that thought true? Well, it could be. Is it completely true? Probably not. And is that thought helpful? Again, probably not. Okay. So once we are aware of what thoughts are helpful or unhelpful, then we can dive into transitioning that thought into something that's more effective. And we'll get into that in a little bit later when we talk about effective coping strategies. So ultimately, your mindset controls your thoughts and therefore your actions. And the power behind this statement is that you have the power to control your mindset. You have the power to lean into the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions that you want to feel that's effective for your optimal performance. Okay. And so by identifying effective coping skills and utilizing them, that's our way and an athlete's way of taking control of their own mindset by focusing on what they can control. So if we're going to lean into, this stress response that a lot of you may be feeling, right? That your athletes are feeling, that you as a parent might be feeling as your athlete starts to expand their bubble of people that they're engaged in, or your coach's stress response with, how do I help my athletes transition as effective as possible? We want to understand how that's affecting performance. So stress is the imbalance between your perception of a demand and your perceived resources. So like I said earlier, right, every athlete, every person perceives some sort of demand or situation a little bit differently. Okay? And it's all about what you perceive as your resources, whether that stress becomes something that's more positive or negative for your experience. Okay, so if an athlete doesn't have the proper coping skills or doesn't feel like they do, right, then that's going to lead to heightened anxiety and depression and feelings of being overwhelmed. Okay, so when athletes experience stress, it leads to anxiety, which is a negative emotional state, focus on irrelevant cues, and ultimately that can lead to increased injury, right? So physical injury can absolutely be influenced by stress and anxiety if we're not coping with it in an effective way. However, our minds automatically think in this negativity bias. Okay, so we automatically go to the negative. That's why whenever someone experiences stress or hears stress, it's this heightened response like, oh, something's wrong. I need to respond. I need to react, right? Versus if we've viewed stress as something that's objective and not necessarily good or bad, but facilitative or debilitative to our performance, then we take out that emotion and we're able to properly cope with it. So stress isn't all bad. And what I mean by that is stress can be broken down into two different perceptions. Stress can be anxiety if we lean into that negativity bias, or it can be viewed as activation. Okay, so by viewing it as activation, we're training our brain and challenging that negativity bias to be something that's more effective to our performance. Okay, so like I said, anxiety is a negative emotional state, and it's characterized by nervousness, worry, apprehension. It's something that hasn't happened yet. It's something that we're worried about, those what if thoughts. Okay, and it's bringing us out of the present moment. Again, focus on irrelevant cues, something that we can't control in the moment, right? We can feel increased heart rate, breathing rate, we're sweating more, loss of focus, and those nerves. But if we can view stress as a way that activates our body, then that leads to something that's more effective to our performance, okay? Activation is a state of general wakefulness or attention, and it's a physiological and psychological activity in a person, okay? So it's combining both what an individual is feeling physiologically, okay? So again, that increased heart rate, breathing rate, right? But also interpreting what they're feeling and thinking. And it's not necessarily positive or negative. Okay, activation is something that's effective versus ineffective for an individual's performance. And it acts on a continuum. So if we think of activation on a continuum or stress on a continuum, right? Activation, we can either be, if we're not activated at all, we're in a deep sleep, versus if we're extremely activated, we're feeling that intense excitement. So if we think about sport and how to perform in sport, we want our body to be activated, right? Because if it wasn't, we would be sleeping, and that's not good for sport. And the beauty behind activation is that everybody has a different ideal level. So if we take those two different athletes where one might be more anxiety provoking in certain situations that are uncertain and they don't have complete control over, maybe that athlete performs better in a more calm and relaxed state. So their ideal activation level is a little bit lower. Versus an athlete who's really excited and thrives off of adrenaline, their activation is going to be, or their ideal activation level is going to be a little bit higher. Okay, so when we're thinking about the current situation that we're in and having athletes transition back into sport where there's still a lot of uncertainty and apprehension, we want to ask them, what's your ideal level of activation, right? What are you feeling in your body right now? And is that effective for your performance, or is that ineffective? And when we can identify that, again, that's leading back to self-awareness, and that's our ability then to work with our athletes on how to obtain their ideal level of activations by utilizing appropriate coping skills. So these action steps, right, for coping, comes with mental skills training. Okay, so a coping strategy is any cognitive or behavioral effort to deal with perceived demands of a situation. Okay, so again, going back to that individual's perception of a situation. Preparation is key. I'm all about preparation. I'm all about identifying different stressors and barriers and situations that athletes face so they feel as prepared as possible and are able to focus on what they can control. When focus starts to go off of things that they can't, like where everybody else has been during this shutdown, versus, people not following protocol versus everybody's individual conditioning level, then their focus isn't on what they can do for them to perform at their best. Okay, so it's not only about what you're doing mentally in preparing with developing different coping strategies, but it's also educating yourself specifically on the certain protocols that are put into play right now. That can depend on the sport that you play, the season that you're in or going into, and being aware of the guidelines that you need to practice. So the more prepared that you feel, right? Okay, I get to practice and there's not I can be full contact, but I still have to social distance on the sideline. Okay, then you're comfortable because you know that you can control that. And you have to be 6 feet from somebody when you're in a huddle or when you're not in game of play. Okay, so not only do we want to prepare mentally with coping strategies, but we also want to educate ourselves on the protocol, on the guidelines as we transition back into sport. Okay, so here I'm going to take you through, I think I have 4 or 5 different coping skills to introduce to you on what you can introduce to your athletes as you transition from the home back to the field, and kind of vice versa, right? So being able to come off the field, come back home, and come full circle and be as consistent as possible with that transition, okay? So pretty simple skill that speaks to that awareness piece is a self-check-in. I think I just posted about this on my social media the other day. Self-check-ins are so important on raising your awareness and what your body and mind need in a given moment, okay? So simple question that you can ask your athlete that then they can ask themselves is, what do I need to do to feel less stressed right now? Right? So 1, how does stress affect my body? Am I feeling really tense? Do I notice my heart beating really fast? Do I notice my thoughts racing a mile a minute? Okay. How is that affecting my body? Right? Is that causing me to feel more anxiety, or is it causing me to feel more excitement? Okay. And so when I understand and ask myself, what do I need to do to feel less stressed? Then I can say, okay, I might need to listen to music to pump myself up and take my mind off of thoughts that I don't want. Or maybe I'm feeling all of this tension and I know that restricts my body. from movement, which can lead to injury. So maybe I need to do a body scan and sense that tension. And on an inhale, feel it. And on an exhale, let it go, release the tension, release all that stress that you feel in your body. Okay, that's also called progressive muscle relaxation. Okay, or maybe we just need to talk to ourselves a little bit, use effective self-talk, right? That could be, you know what, I'm feeling stressed, but I know I did everything that I need to prepare for my first practice or for my first competition, right? So trusting in your training and utilizing effective self-talk with what you need in that moment. Another thing you can do, especially in conversations with preparing your athletes for transitioning back into sport, is ask them what's one thing that they're looking forward to. Okay, with all of this uncertainty and anticipation and trying to follow all the guidelines, we're focused a lot on, I don't necessarily want to use the word negative, but all of the things that really don't encompass why we play sport in the first place. Right, so if we can bring that attention back to the why we play and why we're excited to play sport again, that can also act as de-stress, because we're reminding ourselves or reminding our athletes, right, why they enjoy playing, right, and developing and adopting more of a positive mindset versus everything else that's going on that we can't necessarily control. Next, we have confidence. So confidence is one of the most important foundational mental skills when I work with athletes and teaching them how to really hone in on what their sources are. So what I mean by a source is where you get your confidence from. Okay, so like I said back in the beginning, athletes could be feeling stress and anxiety because they might fear that they're not at the same competitive level that they were pre-shutdown. They might be a little rusty. They might not be as conditioned as they thought they were, right? Or maybe they're going into it like, yeah, I feel great and prepared and I'm ready. And they get there and realize game shape is completely different than me just being in shape on my own, right? And I'm sure a lot of that way. I know some girls that coach. So we want to have athletes develop their well of, so they can just dip into their well whenever they need it and pull out a source and be able to say, okay, right? So whenever it's shaken or whenever it's shattered a little bit, I know that I have something that I can rely on to make my confidence more consistent. So just a few here, what a source could be. This isn't the end all be all, but could be past accomplishments. So they've been through some sort of hardship or adversity before, right? So if we take injury, for example, that's a huge obstacle that athletes have to overcome when they're injured and they're regaining their strength and their energy to get back into sport. Right, so they've been through some sort of hardship before. They've been through this before, so they know that they can do it again. Any training and preparation they've done the last 3 and 4 months, right? Like, what have you been doing to keep your speed as consistent as possible or your skills as consistent as possible? And what are your strengths, right? So if you know you're a fast runner and one of the fastest on the team, that might not necessarily change all that much, right? Or that you know that you've mastered a skill before, and that's one of your go-to skills, trust in that. Okay. And lastly, really tap in to that social support. So ask your athletes what they need from you, right? How can you best support them in this transition? Is it reminding them of their own sources of confidence? Is it shooting them a text, right before practice or right after practice? I know that with some protocols that are going into play, especially in competition, athletes are only allowed one spectator. So maybe you can't have both parents there or all of your support system. Some of the professional sports that are going back into play aren't having any fans at all, right? So how does that affect your mindset or your stress level, right? So really diving into what a support system means to an athlete and what you can do to best support that. And lastly, I just have here is create a confidence statement. So that goes into self-talk, right? So having athletes create a statement that they can pull out right away. I'm confident because I've been through hardship before and I know I can overcome it. Or I am confident because I've practiced every day during the shutdown. And I'm confident that, my skills are still up to speed, something along those lines. Okay. And then these last two here, goal setting is huge with all of this. Especially, you know, standards are going to have to be reset, right? We don't have as high of standards, or athletes aren't going to hit those standards like they did back in February, right? So we have to reset those standards so we're able to set daily and weekly goals to retain that standard that we had before. And a way to do that, to gain progress and challenge yourselves and readapt your goals, is for an objective evaluation. And that's, you know, what did I do well today? What do I need to do better tomorrow? And how am I going to do that? And lastly, set a routine, right? So what coping skills do you want to utilize pre-practice, post-practice, during practice? You know, trust in what you need to do for nutrition, how you need to stretch. Routines are 100% in your control and needed to feel as prepared as you can as we transition back into the sport. So as we effectively develop these coping skills and have athletes really hone in on what they need in the moment, that's going to lead to developing. And it depends on, see it as an opportunity to develop just that. Because if they don't, and they don't utilize these coping skills effectively or have them in place, and we don't reflect on that, then that's going to lead athletes to feel overwhelmed or stuck and not know what to do, or lead to burnout and feel unmotivated. Okay, so we want to take this opportunity to talk to our athletes about what it is that they're experiencing right now and how that's making them a stronger athlete. And that's going to help them develop a resilient mindset. And so a resilient mindset doesn't necessarily mean positive thinking, okay? But it means recognizing that there are alternate ways of viewing a situation. We don't want to avoid unwanted emotions or feelings or anxiety, okay? We want to embrace that so we learn how to effectively manage that to better performance. So resilient athletes have lower anxiety levels. They have different coping skills to use in different situations, and they're able to face problems rather than avoid them. Okay, they have a higher self-esteem, and they're able to learn and adapt from hardship. So something that you can take away from this to help them and encourage them to develop a resilient mindset is challenge them to recognize how they maybe overcame a barrier or obstacle during the shutdown. Right? So if they felt unmotivated to work out on their own, right? Maybe they thought to themselves, I focused on my purpose or what I could control to deal with that and tap into my motivators, right? Or when they started to feel overwhelmed, they used centered breathing or they listened to music, right? So all of those things that they can identify, right? Recognize that and encourage that, because that's helping them develop a resilient mindset, which combats that feeling of anxiety. So ultimately, we want to teach our athletes to take control of their mindset and see the power that they have to do. Okay, so as we're helping them deal with these feelings of stress and transition to the field, right? Take that time to debrief what the shutdown was for them and what they learned in it. Okay, so whatever obstacle or hardship that they overcame, whether that was a lack of motivation or lack of engagement because they couldn't be with their friends, right? Recognize what they did to overcome that, and have them recognize how that's going to make them a stronger and more resilient athlete when they face adversity that all athletes face in sport. And that is all I have for you. So I think I left a few minutes for questions. I know I went a little bit over my time.
Yeah, no, Theresa, that was all amazing information there. I you know, because as you're going through this stuff, right, as physical therapists here, like we have our patients that come into the clinic, right, and we're dealing with very similar situations in terms of, you know, patients feeling uncomfortable about coming in or aren't sure what the procedures are, the protocols. And I loved, you know, some of your examples were all about like being prepared, right, and that all stems back to good communication, from the moment they walk in, right, or going through social media, as they look on our websites, right, as they look, or as you're teaching those types of skills, just having that good communication that here's what's going to happen, here's what we know, here's how we're going to defend against it, right? So you can have a better mindset, right? You can gain that confidence that you talked about, to be able to kind of come into a setting like this. I know one of the things too I had a question about as we were kind of talking, was how can, like, kids that have lost, like high school athletes, right? They lost their spring season, right? And that can be a hard transition, like as they're going pretty much a year without playing like in games there. Is there things that you would recommend that they start doing now, right, in preparation for that spring? Because we don't know what it's going to look like, COVID, like come like when they go to college, right? Your seniors that lost their season are going to play. They're going to go into a whole new atmosphere with having to wear masks, with having to maybe leave school early again. So like, what would be something that you would recommend for that a kid can start to think about, or a parent can help an athlete with?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So there's still a lot of uncertainty out there, right? Like you just said.
Absolutely.
So I think when athletes start to lean into that uncertainty, that can feel really overwhelming, or, having to wear masks on the sideline or anything to that, all of that can feel really uncomfortable, unexpected, and unwanted. Yeah. Right? So we have to challenge that feeling into something that's more productive, because if we lean into that and it becomes, I don't want to do this and this is frustrating, right? That takes away from what we can control. We can't control whether or not we have to wear a mask, or that we have to social distance, or that we lost a season, right? That all happened. But what we can control is how we adapt in the moment. Right. So going back to that question of what do I need to do to be at my best right now? Right. So right. Going back to what I said in terms of, we don't want to avoid those thoughts. We want to acknowledge them. Right. Because if we avoid them and push them away, then we're saying we don't want to deal with you. Right. But we want to deal with you. Right. So we want to acknowledge those thoughts that we're having, accept that they're there, and then take action on how to challenge them. Okay. So challenge them, especially these spring athletes that are going into maybe even college, where they get to start practicing maybe in the fall, right? Trusting in what you know how to do, right? So you can still train, you can run, you can practice, you can practice your skills, right? You have 100% in control of your own conditioning and your own physical preparation. So I would lean into that, right? Yeah. Making different goals that you want to set on a weekly and monthly basis, making certain plans for yourself. So routines in the day, that's something that you can control, right? So I wake up, maybe I go for a morning run, I eat breakfast, and then I have an afternoon skill session. You know what I mean? And go off of that structure that athletes are so familiar with, right? And I feel like need, because they're so used to it, buy into that, buy into what's useful for you, and create that routine and really buy into what you can control.
Oh, go ahead. Theresa, one thing that I think stands out to me when in talking about all of this is, obviously Jared and I come from a different world, but our worlds overlap quite a bit, from the managing stress and anxiety on the field and how it relates to the injuries, where we kind of see people, and then that leads to other stressors and anxieties, and we do our best from the physical realm to try and prepare people and build their confidence up before they get back on the field. Absolutely. What would you say to parents, coaches, or even the athletes themselves on the importance and advocating for this for their team or their group as a whole? Because we know people go back and they're overly distracted and stressed and anxious about external factors. They're more likely to get injured versus focusing on the sport or the activity at hand. So what would you say from an advocacy standpoint, if you're a parent or if you're a coach at home, where would you say is like what the first thing they can do to start helping advocate for their student athletes to get this stress management help?
Sure. So one thing I would say is kind of setting the tone and acknowledging what's going to be expected, right? So for a parent, it could be, hey, you might not be in the shape that you thought you were in, or that you were in pre-shutdown, right? So like becoming aware and acknowledging there's going to be some differences as you return to sport, right? So we want to prepare them in that mindset there. Okay. For a coach, I think what's helpful is resetting that baseline and standard. So kind of seeing where your athletes are, right? Because if you're a coach and that you expect them to get out there to the level that they were pre-shutdown, then it's most likely not going to happen. And that's going to heighten an athlete's anxiety level, right? Because they think they have to be somewhere. And then when they're not, and they let down a coach's expectations, then that's going to feed back into that negative feedback loop of anxiety and disappointment, which leads to a lack of confidence, right? So we want parents and coaches to put that out there, right? These are my expectations. This is what we're going to work towards. Once we have a new standard, we're going to set tangible and effective goals to get back to where we want to be. So I think that's a huge piece of it, is just acknowledging where athletes are and where they want to be, and then creating a plan to get there. And like you said, when we feel that increased stress and anxiety, we're not focused on what we need to execute, which increases injury. And we don't want our athletes to get injured the first practice that they're back, right? So again, if athletes don't understand where they hold their stress or anxiety or how that affects their body, I think that's a huge, sign that, hey, I need my athlete to understand how this affects their performance, right? Both on a physical and a mental level. I mean, I'm a big proponent that, what your mind affects your body is just a vehicle for what your mind is telling it to do. So, we want our athletes to be able to connect that. And if they can't, then we need to take a step back and say, okay, how can I help you? And where is that disconnect?
Yeah. I know I got one last question. From our perspective, right, communication is key when it comes to like your physicians, to your physical therapists, right, to your athletic trainers, right? So that we have like that kind of side of it. From your perspective, you've been working with a lot of teams in the Philadelphia area, right, at all levels and kind of individual patients. Give us a little bit of insight onto how the communication's gone for you with the coaches, with the strength and conditioning staff, the athletic department, because that's a huge part of it. We all have to be on the same page, all healthcare providers, right? And that doesn't that includes you from your side and what you do for them as well. For our athletes, and also for anyone kind of having those types of mental, like the blocks. What's it kind of like for you? How involved are you? That way parents know, like, okay, what's the communication like at that level there?
Sure. So I think, especially this time, has really shed light on the importance of that communication, and how mental health professionals and mental skills coaches like myself are so important in this conversation that we have. And so in our approach with Summit, we take a very holistic approach with everybody's part of the athlete's overall well-being. So we, understand and ask the athlete what their needs are. We ask the coach what their needs are, and then we kind of put a plan in place together based on the needs of the whole system.
Yeah.
Right. So, anything that an athlete would come tell me personally stays with me. And then generally we give coach feedback on, say, hey, I think this is what we can do. And this is a plan going forward on how to manage stress and anxiety with your athletes, right? Or on a team level, and kind of vice versa, right? Like, hey, coach sees this, let's bring this into the picture. So we're very open in the sense that we need to develop a common language with both our athletes and coaches. So they're not only reiterating the messages that we're telling in terms of developing effective mental skills and coping strategies, but also, you know, what they see that we can help them with.
Sure.
So while we have a foundational approach and have that expertise, we want to hear and make our plans specific to each individual athlete and each individual team's needs.
Awesome.
Great.
That's great. Go ahead.
So, anything else to add?
No, I was just going to say, T, thanks for coming on and helping us out here and, you know, talking with us, because, I mean, this is a big deal. This is a big deal for our patients, right, getting back in the clinic. This is a deal for athletes returning to the field. You know, so we really appreciate you coming on and talking a little bit about this. And, you know, anything else, like in terms of how people can reach you? I know it's right on the page there. So anything else that you want to add to our conversation here?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jared and Mike. I really appreciate it. You know, I think what you guys do and what I do is very collaborative with, you know,
Absolutely.
physical rehabilitation and reconditioning and the mental aspect of that as well. So I really appreciate this platform and you stressing the importance of what we both do. It's great to hear. But yeah, you know, if you want to explore more mental skills training, we have a website that you can sign up for weekly newsletters and tips. We have a YouTube channel that we've been posting more videos to. And then we are pretty active on social media on Instagram. And then if you wanted to contact myself directly, that's my email address. Emily's email is just emily@sportspsychs.com or summitsportspsychs.com. So we're kind of along all platforms here.
Perfect. That's awesome.
Theresa, I really appreciate you joining us. And we are going to actually, this webinar has been recorded and it's actually going to go on our YouTube page as well. So if anybody wants to find your information, it will be available to them. So they can visit our YouTube page at Kinetic TV. If you go to youtube.com and search for Kinetic TV. And for future webinars and sessions, please follow our Facebook at Kinetic, facebook.com/Kinetic Physical Therapy. And each week we will be having a different topic. And Theresa, thank you again for joining us for this week. And we look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Steve.
Take care.
See you.
Bye.